evening. I'm Charles Duffy, and this is Political Pulse. Tonight we're going to talk a little bit about Maryland, go back in Maryland history somewhat, and we're going to have a big part of it. And we're honored to have Senator Joseph Tydings, who was United States Senator, United States Attorney for the District of Maryland, and also you were in the Maryland House of Delegates. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. I want to go back, first of all, Senator, back when you were in the Maryland House of Delegates in the late 1950s. You were a young man, 31 years old, and there was a big presidential primary in Maryland. The Democrats just had their primary in West Virginia. Next, they were going to Oregon, but sandwiched in between was the Maryland primary.
We're talking about the presidential election in 1960.
And you had the machine all set up in Maryland that was, hey, stay out of it.
And in those days, in 1960, there were only 6 major primaries. It was the old-fashioned National Democratic Convention where the leaders got together, so-called smoke-filled rooms, and picked the best. And Senator John Kennedy from Massachusetts was running in the primaries. He was not favored initially against Lyndon Johnson, the majority leader, and he made a decision, the right decision I felt, to come into Maryland and run in the primary. Unfortunately for him, the Governor Tawes, the state organization, did not want him to run in the Maryland primary. They wanted to go in with an uninstructed delegation to the convention. They really wanted to deliver it to Lyndon Johnson. And Senator Kennedy decided to run in the primary in any event.
How did you get, somehow the Kennedys, Bobby Kennedy, John F. Kennedy, they heard of you, they got in touch with you, and how did you get involved with the Kennedy campaign?
Well, my first relationship with Senator Kennedy was, actually before I was even elected to the House of Delegates, I was president of the Young Democrats in Maryland and chairman of our Jackson Day dinner, and I invited a young senator from Massachusetts, John Kennedy, as in 1954, to come over and be our speaker. So I drove the car over, picked him up, and brought him to Baltimore and brought him back, and obviously I was hugely impressed. A very dynamic young man, war hero. And then in 1960, when he was running for president, I was for him. The way I got involved in his campaign was when Governor Tawes told him, I don't want you running here, and we're going to run our own delegation. Senator Kennedy sent 2 of his lieutenants, Larry O'Brien, who became chairman of the National Committee.
Head of the NBA, too.
That's right, first head of the National Basketball Association, and a Congressman, Torrey McDonald, and they came over to recruit. This was our short session of the legislature in 1960 to recruit people who would volunteer work for him, and I was one of the 6 or 7 delegates that signed up, said I'd be willing to work for you, I'm for you. And then the session was over, which was February, late February. The primary in Maryland was the first week in May. Maryland was an important primary because the 5th primary the week before was in West Virginia. And Senator Kennedy was not favored in West Virginia. The fact that he was a Catholic was a big issue, and it was felt that Hubert Humphrey would carry West Virginia, and it was hugely important that we carry Maryland for him. In any event, after the election, after the session of the legislature, I was back practicing law in Baltimore, and I got a call from the headquarters, and the headquarters was basically one, we call a pal from Massachusetts, a funeral director who was a longtime Kennedy supporter, to come down to check up on things. And the Maryland Kennedy organization really had 2 or 3 terrific names as state chairman, former mayors and leading lawyers, but nobody doing any work. So I was called over, and would I mind being the attorney for the campaign? Of course I'll be the attorney for the campaign. I'll file all the documents, take care of it. So I went back, and 2 days later I got another call, come over, and will you be the political agent for the campaign? And the political agent is a person that says John F. Kennedy for president by authority of Joseph D. Tydings, political agent, and you're the one ultimately responsible. If there are problems, theoretically, you go to jail, but not a real problem. I was happy to do it. The real reason I think they wanted me was because the name of Tydings and my father was so popular. I was just a two-term legislator. And from that point on, they were not organized, they were not set, and they hadn't gotten a state organization, and I volunteered to do the work, and ultimately I was campaign secretary, then I wound up as campaign manager.
And for people who never met President Kennedy, I mean, you know, as you look back, you think, God, he's a very monumental figure, charismatic, smart. He was the youngest elected president, I believe, but you saw him, you spent time with him up close. What was he like? I mean, was
well,
he?
First of all, he was straight. I mean, I spent time when he stayed in my home. When he campaigned in Maryland, we were in the car together, in the plane together, and there was no BS with him. He saw things as they were. He was very direct. I was with him when he was making telephone calls to leaders across the country, trying to line them up. When he won the West Virginia primary, he automatically became a viable candidate. And when he came into Maryland, people that I had tried to get for him and they just weren't interested, all of a sudden showed up for pictures. And I remember they were all crowding around, and I remember him winking at me because I had been back and forth Washington, and I had laid out the exact lay of the land in Maryland, so he knew what was what. But very, very sharp, very direct, and a tireless worker. And of course, he engendered huge loyalty.
Mm-hmm. After John Kennedy won the presidency, the Kennedys, I'm not talking about Robert Kennedy, John Kennedy, they wanted you in the administration. Hey, you did a good job. You also worked in some other states, I think Delaware and Florida, but
that's right. I was coordinator in those two states, in the convention in California and in the general election.
But you had made some enemies when you were in the House of Delegates. You carried out some investigations. So, tell them.
In the session, the long session, which began in 1961, in the month that President Kennedy was inaugurated, I was involved in leading an investigation into corrupt savings and loan operations in Maryland and insurance. And in the course of that, I uncovered some political figures who were were conducting themselves in manners which I didn't consider ethical, nor did the people of Maryland. The newspapers got on top of it. And when the election was over, I had told Bob Kennedy, who I became very close to, that I wanted to be U.S. Attorney. I mean, he'd offered me jobs in Washington, but I said I wanted to be U.S. Attorney in Maryland. And I had asked him, do I need to get any letters from anybody or leading figures? Because at that time I was sort of popular. And he said, no, it's not a big post. It's not that important. You don't need any letters.
I think you were 33 years old then.
Actually, it would be 1960, 61. I was, I guess it was, or 31. I think it was 31 years old.
Early 30s.
But in any event, this was a bitter battle in the legislature. And in the course of it, some leading Democratic figures were embarrassed. And I remember on a Sunday night, I was at home, you know, during the legislative session, maybe 3 weeks after the inauguration. And I got a phone call from Bob Kennedy. Bob was the Attorney General. I remember he was saying, God damn it, Joe, he said, don't you have a single friend in the state of Maryland? And I was taken aback. And then all of a sudden I figured what had happened. I said, well, and I explained to him the fight going on in the legislature, the issues. I told him, call this investigative reporter for the Post or the Sun or look in the newspapers. And what had happened is the governor had sent, well, the entire Democratic congressional delegation, plus the Attorney General of the state, plus the Democratic National Committeeman and party chairman had gone over quietly, surreptitiously to Washington to see Larry O'Brien, the chairman of the Democratic National Committee, to say that I was personally unacceptable to be U.S. Attorney in Maryland. They would support me for any position in Washington, Assistant Attorney General, anything, or any other post, ambassador, what have you, but not U.S. Attorney in
Well,
Maryland.
that's what Robert Kennedy, though, he said, hey, you don't have any friends in Maryland, probably somewhat kiddingly, but he was looking for somebody like you, wasn't he? Somebody to stand up at the end of the day.
That's right. That's the great thing about Bob Kennedy. He's such a straight shooter. Almost people held it against him. But and some of the one biography, a writer reported the conversation, which Bobby, who was Attorney General, the President, has said, I know we would like to appoint Joe. He did a great work for us, but I can't appoint him with all these political figures all opposed to him being U.S. Attorney. And Bobby in the book is reported to say, that's why he ought to be U.S. Attorney. And they made me U.S. Attorney, notwithstanding.
You were in your early 30s, which is very young for a United States Attorney. And looking back, what were the kind of some memories back then? You tried your own cases, which is unusual too for the United States Attorney.
Well, the United States Attorney's Office is a hugely important position. First of all, the United States Attorney, unlike states' attorneys or district attorneys in other states, the United States Attorney has the actual power to decline to prosecute if he thinks it's not in the interests of justice. And there are occasions when you, which is a very powerful position, you are confirmed by the United States Senate for 4 years. And until this recent administration where they tried to politicize the office, the U.S. attorneys had stood out. For instance, in our state, George Bell, who was a Republican United States attorney, he was the one that led the prosecution of the Republican Vice President, Spiro Agnew, and forced him to resign. When I was the United States Attorney for the District of Maryland, I prosecuted 2 Democratic congressmen, convicted them. I prosecuted the Democratic Speaker of the House of Delegates, Democratic Chairman of the Insurance Committee of the House, and I was a Democrat. And the U.S. Attorney's Office, we felt, in Maryland, is a great office. And by and large, we've had great U.S. attorneys for the most part. And you enforce the law without fear or favor. And Robert Kennedy enabled us to do that. And we have a great tradition going in Maryland for the U.S. Attorney's Office.
And at some point, I guess it was in 1963 or 1964, after you were United States Attorney for a couple of years, you decided that you were going to run for the United States.
Well, President Kennedy asked me. I would not have run when I was only 34.
What did he called you up and said?
Well, it was after I had prosecuted a major case against 2 Democratic congressmen, one represented by Edward Bennett Williams, a great lawyer, and he came up to my home and for supper when he was president, which is a great honor to have. And at that time, he asked me to run for the Senate against the incumbent Republican senator. I would not ordinarily have done that. I mean, I was too young, or at least I felt I was too young. But when he asked me, then I said, yes, I will. And I was in the '64 election, and I resigned in November to run, to get my campaign going. It was one of the great tragic days of my life. The same day I resigned was the day he was assassinated.
Well, let's pick up with that. We're going to take our break, and we're going to be right back with former United States Senator from Maryland, Joseph Tydings.
Grams, wouldn't you rather be helping?
We're back with former United States Senator from Maryland, Joseph Tydings, former United States Attorney. You're just talking about the tragedy in 1963. Then you went through when President Kennedy was assassinated, who you knew personally. Then you went through and you ran against the incumbent Republican. I think he was 2-term Senator Glenn Bell Sr. 1964. That was the year LBJ.
That's right. That was a Goldwater landslide, so to speak.
And you won very big yourself.
That's
I
right.
think you went to the United States Senate. You were still in your mid-30s.
Yeah, I think I was 35 when I was elected.
And you served with people, big figures like Mike Mansfield from Montana, the Senate Majority Leader Edmund Muskie from Maine.
That's right.
Huge figure. Hubert Humphrey was, I guess, during some of that time was the vice president and the president.
Everett Dirksen, the great Republican leader. We had great Republican senators, great Democratic senators, and the tenor of the Senate was so different then. And we didn't have the money thing. You didn't have the money thing, and the lobbying efforts, which has so corrupted the congressional processes today. When I ran for the Senate in Maryland, and it was a huge campaign, was $250,000 I raised. Well, that's $100, campaign contribution is a big thing. And unfortunately today, if you want to run in Maryland, you got to get $2 or $3 million in hand before you run, and you're beholden to people you shouldn't be beholden. There are too many lobbyists who have the congressman's ear and the senator's ear because they raise money for them. And the people back home who should have the ear, they don't. And it wasn't that way then. And the relationships between, for instance, Mac Mathias, Republican senator, were just like this. We worked together, we teamed together. And even young Glenn Bell, who beat me, we were very good friends. And even after I lost on the issues, and we stayed good friends. I was at his funeral when his own governor Ehrlich didn't even show up, but I was there because I was a close friend of the family. And we had that kind of relationship. We could work together.
And you talked about the issues. You were opposed to the Vietnam War, which was controversial at the time.
Yeah, very controversial.
The National Rifle Association went after you because you wanted to. You were pushing for, I guess, the federal.
Well, when Bob Kennedy was assassinated, and I had campaigned for him, we were in the Senate together, and when he announced for the presidency against President Johnson, there was only one other senator, Democratic senator, came out for him. That was his brother, Ted. The two of us, and I was very close for him. I campaigned for him. And then when he was assassinated, I finally decided to take on the National Rifle Association, and I lost a switch of 11,000 votes, and I would have been reelected. But I just felt that we needed registration and licensing of handguns and firearms, and the National Rifle Association was able to convince the hunters of Maryland, notwithstanding the fact that I probably did more duck and goose hunting in my life than any of the members of the National Rifle Association board. Nevertheless, they convinced hunters that I was going to do away with hunting, which was just baloney, but they're very effective lobbyists.
And you talked at, I think, at a recent forum, and you talked about you became a leading advocate of gun control after Robert Kennedy was assassinated. And there was a quote that you said at the forum that was kind of interesting. You were speaking of Robert Kennedy. He certainly gave me confidence to take on the difficult politically unpopular things, Tydings said of Kennedy. A lot of people called me insane, and I guess you're talking about your pushing for more gun control licensing and registration. And you said it, and he said that it would cost you the election. They were right, but he taught me courage, and you have to do what you think is right.
Yeah, Robert Kennedy was a terrific human. He's a lot like my father. I was adopted. But my father was an incredible man and tremendously courageous. Took on Franklin Roosevelt as a Democrat.
Well, your dad was a four-term United States senator.
That's right, four-term. Unfortunately, he died 3 years before I was appointed U.S. Attorney, so he never saw me as U.S. Attorney or running for the Senate. But and Robert Kennedy was like him. He was absolutely courageous. And one of my great memories of Robert Kennedy has to do maybe a week or two before he died. I was campaigning for him in the West, and I was in Nebraska. I'd been in Nebraska one day. I was going to go out another day with an airplane hopping across and speaking in different places. And he came in Omaha the night before my second day, and we had dinner alone together. And I asked him the normal questions that you would when you're coming in to speak for someone. Well, who should I talk to in this city, and what sort of issues should I push, and what's your message you want me to give to them? The same sort of briefing I would give to senators, like Muskie would come in to speak for me. I'd tell him what to do here, where that. None of that with Bob Kennedy. Don't worry about that, Joe. He said, just go out and study the conditions and the way Native Americans are treated out here, the similarities between the way African Americans have been treated in the South, and then try and go back home in Washington and do something about it. And that just never happens. I mean, you don't have people, when you're coming in the campaign, you don't have leaders saying that. The leaders would say, well, Joe, I campaigned for senators, governors all over this country when I was in the Senate. They would say, well, when you're in this, stress this issue, stress that issue. Say I'm in favor of this. Say I asked personally for him. That wasn't Robert Kennedy. He was saying, educate yourself and try and do some good when you get back to Washington. I mean, that's just, you don't see that very often.
And
at least I never did, except with my father.
Back in, and you mentioned FDR, Franklin Roosevelt. I think your dad was a conservative Democrat, but
very, very conservative.
Franklin Roosevelt
Well,
wanted to nudge him to be more liberal. Came into the state in 1938.
Right. My father opposed Roosevelt's Supreme Court packing bill, and effectively, and he opposed some of his other, social measures. And Roosevelt came into Maryland in the Democratic primary, spoke 3 or 4 times, and sent 5 cabinet officers in here, and supported the Democratic congressman in the primary.
Your dad still won.
Still won, yeah.
Do you see similarities, John F. Kennedy's presidency and Barack Obama in the way they're appointing their cabinet? Barack Obama's appointing the top people to his cabinet.
Yeah, there are a lot of similarities, and it's a great thing for the American people, the similarities, because John Kennedy was constantly learning. He didn't claim that he had all the answers. I mean, when the Bay of Pigs fiasco, even though it was organized, he'd only been president 3 weeks or something, it was organized by Eisenhower and his people, he went along with it. He took the full blame, but he started straightening things out right away. He learned from it. And what he learned, of course, paid off when you had the Cuban Missile Crisis, because he didn't necessarily take everything that anybody in a high position told him for the gospel. And Obama, well, for instance, John Kennedy's cabinet. John Kennedy picked the president of Ford Motor Company, who was a Republican, to be Secretary of Defense. His name was McNamara, Bob McNamara. I'd met him a couple times, but he was no friend of Kennedy's. I think he probably had, I don't even think he supported him.
So he was looking for the top people.
Yeah, he brought in Douglas Dillon, a great Republican. It had been, I think, in the Eisenhower cabinet. He brought in others, and the fact that Obama is willing to go, and bringing Hillary Clinton in as Secretary of State, arguably, she's the outstanding person. She should be best qualified by far.
Sure.
But the fact that he would do it and he's going to need the best qualified, because he's inheriting a mess, a terrible mess.
And after you lost or left the United States Senate, you lost a very close campaign, as you stated, to Glenn Bell Jr. And after that, you still practiced law, but only person in Maryland appointed regent for the University of Maryland 3 times, I guess by 3 different governors.
That's right. Well, the University of Maryland is one of my great loves, and has always been. I went to the University of Maryland, and my father and I are the only 2 undergraduates from the University of Maryland to go to the United States Senate. So we both served on the Board of Regents. So I feel that the University of Maryland is just hugely important to this state, to the future of the state, the future economy of the state, and it's growing into a great university. We've been fortunate. We've had some great presidents. Got a great president, Dan Moat. His predecessor, Britt Kerwin, now the chancellor, is a great president. So, and we have great professional schools in Baltimore, great school of medicine, great school of law, and the University of Maryland in Baltimore and Hopkins are anchoring that city. They're bringing back Baltimore. And the University of Maryland here in College Park, the flagship, is going to be the basis of what, in the biotech for Silicon Valley East, the biotech quarter in Montgomery County. It's a hugely valuable asset to the state of Maryland. And fortunately, now have a governor who realizes that, O'Malley. His predecessor didn't, Ehrlich, but it's a great asset for Maryland, and I'm privileged to be able to work for it.
Governor took on some tough issues with this structural deficit, 1.7 billion. I'm talking about Governor O'Malley.
Yeah. Governor O'Malley is a very impressive. I was not for him in the primary. I was not against him. But his courageous decision to bring in the legislature last year and face a structural deficit problem and raise taxes, which is incredibly unpopular. And he knew it at the time, but he knew that the danger of the state. The reason he did that is a reason that we're in far better shape in Maryland this year with respect to deficit than almost any state in the country. We've got huge problems, but California and New York, some of those states, make our problems look.
California is, I think, asking for a federal bailout. But
That's
you
right.
You look back at your political career, 6 years in the Maryland House of Delegate, very young United States attorney, United States senator. What kind of, I mean, it's a great political career, and what kind of pops out at you? What are your reflections, or what have you learned, or?
Well, one of my reflections is that democracy is it's a wonderful system of government, but we must have good people come into public service. That was one of the great contributions that President Kennedy made. He attracted young people into public service. That's one of the great attractions of Obama, as he is attracting. We need our best and our brightest and our ablest young people, women, men, minorities, to take a turn at public service. And you don't necessarily have to be elected at public. You can be public service working for your university or your town council or community affairs. But democracy, in order for democracy to work, you've got to have the best and the brightest of people who have been blessed. And one of the things that always sort of rubs me the wrong way when people who do very well, and I've been very fortunate in life, but we all take it that it's all due to us. Well, it's not all due to us individually. It's due to the fact that we're lucky enough to be born in this country and to have parents or grandparents or great-grandparents. My great-grandparents, my mother's side, immigrated from Wales, was a blacksmith. I mean, we're very fortunate in being in this country, and we owe something. And the public service, and you can participate in public service without necessarily being elected. You can help people get elected. You can try, and the town council, a county council, hugely important.
We just have about 10 seconds left,
Right.
but who would you say was the big influencer on your life? Big influences.
Well, obviously my father, my adopted father, is a great influence on my life. My parents, my grandparents were wonderful influences, but Robert Kennedy, John Kennedy, they're great influences on my life.
Honor to have you on, and a privilege. Thanks very much for coming on the show, Senator.
My pleasure, Charles. Thank you.
And thank you, everybody, for joining us. Remember, if it's Tuesday night at 9:30 or Thursday night at 9, it's Political Pulse on Channel 16 TV. I'm Charles Duffy. We'll see you next week.